Good morning. Thanks. Great to be here. We're making substantial progress. I'll walk through this pretty quickly, and so hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end. Oops. What's the best read? Okay. What I'm going to go through is, here's the agenda. You can read that. I'm going to try to give you a cross-section of where everything is on this project. Why are we doing this? Well, obvious answer, I guess, is declining population. The city's population has dropped dramatically since 1950, and what that means is there's fewer tax revenues. The city receives a fairly small percentage of its revenues from real estate tax, so kind of everything else, which is dependent on people, income tax, sales tax, and so forth, that percentage is really critical, and no money, people don't get paid, you don't get the services. There's also a huge resource of beautiful historic buildings in over the Rhine that are vacant and need new businesses and new residents. And that's really half of the reason for the streetcar, transportation and redevelopment. But also, Cincinnati's actually in kind of a center of rail supply, rail transit supply industries, and so what that'll do will actually help grow those industries. Streetcars need all the same thing as their big brothers and sisters, you know, the steel wheels, the rails, and everything. The Cincinnati streetcar will be built in Elmira, New York, from parts that are sourced all over the United States and, of course, Spain. But it will meet the Buy America because it is being built in Elmira. But hopefully we'll see something coming closer to home. Summary of the work, just summarize this. We still don't know the financial and schedule impact of City Council's pause. We're still working on that. It's a pretty complex issue. We lost some subcontractors fell away during the pause. They took other work. Some suppliers fell away, and just how all that interacts is quite interesting. Same thing on the streetcar side. Chris Eilerman, who many of you know, is actually in Philadelphia today doing the final design review of the power units, the trucks for the streetcar, and he's going to pick up some more information on their schedule impacts. Inclusion, we're doing pretty well. I'll just give you the detail of that in a moment. And we've hit some substantial milestones. If we can get down on Ray Street down to Central Parkway by the end of the month, we stand a good chance of getting back on our original track work schedule. So I'll show you some pictures here in a moment. But of course, the history of the streetcar has been circuitous. This is a whiteboard that Chris put together, which starts at the top and works its way down to the bottom level of all the steps, all the little twists and turns that have happened to the project, of which, of course, there have been many. But we're pressing ahead now. Here are the milestones that were in the bid document, and thus the contract. And these are still the effective dates. The Over the Rhine Loop completion, that June 29th, we think that may be still doable, but that may slide slightly along with the streetcar delivery. And so kind of stay tuned for that. But there's enough float in the total schedule that we think the revenue service by September 15th of 2016 should certainly be doable still. I know you can't read this probably on the screen too well, but I did leave copies of this back on the table. Oh, by the way, if any of you want a copy of the presentation, I'll be glad to get that to you. Just give me your card afterwards. So essentially, this breaks down the major segments of the track work. The real star of the construction work in January and February was the Heat King, which heats up glycol and runs it through hoses, and then you put it underneath concrete blankets, and it'll keep your excavation, your reinforcing steel, your rails nice and toasty warm, so that you can actually work down to about 10 degrees. Concrete, of course, you don't want to put down at that temperature, even with the subgrade being warmed, but this really kind of helped the productivity during the winter. And the terms of our contract kind of pushed them into doing this sort of thing. There were 2 of these on the project. The work that goes on here is, this shows the old tracks being taken out, and the old tracks were at a gauge that was wider than conventional rail. Our tracks are being put in exactly the same as freight rail tracks, and they're also the same rails, actually, that they use on freight rail tracks, because they're the only rails that are made in the U.S. other than New York subway rails, which are a little different and more expensive. But we'll still have to use those on the project. When the excavation's done, they prepare the subgrade. There's a 4 to 6 inch layer of crushed stone that's compacted, and we're using a fully reinforced track slab because our soil conditions aren't the best here in Cincinnati. That alluvial sand and gravel, so forth, is not real well naturally compacted under the street. And the rails arrive, and they have to pick a spot where the overhead utilities don't get in the way. After the rails are set, there's a rubber boot put on them. A top layer of steel is put in, and the rails are actually welded together by thermite process. You actually melt the rails together. It's pretty exciting. It looks like the EBN fireworks when they set these things off. Essentially burns the rails right together. That clamp they're working with there keeps the rail in alignment. But even after all that, before the concrete can be placed, there's still lots of cross checks that are done to make sure the rails are at the right elevation. We're going to have to do quite a bit of pavement remodeling, which will mean street-based work in some areas. If you've driven up Elm Street around Finley, you'll see a good example of that. But the rails we wanted to try to get some curb height back too when we redid the streets. So that's the reason behind that. Here's the concrete going in on Ray Street last Thursday, our first warm day in a long time, and everybody was very, very happy. This was on Race just north of 15th. And that's what you get when it's done. You can see the thickness of the slab, how it ties everything together. You can also see a tie there. Our tracks, even though you don't see the tie above the surface of the concrete, has ties just like the regular railroad, and that's used to help level the tracks. Those have adjusting bolts and nuts. Anybody that wants a tour of the work, by the way, just get in touch with me. Here's whole foundations, pretty straightforward. This is an aerial view of the operation and maintenance site at Henry and Ray Street. That's just 1 block north of Finley and 2 blocks north of Finley Market. The building on the lower right is the old Christian Moorline Brewery, which Rheingeist Brewery is now brewing beer in again. It's a heck of a place. It's quite an experience to go there. in the tap room. Here's stormwater detention system, so we don't flood out the combined sewers in the neighborhood with the hard surface and the roof of the maintenance building. Here they're putting down a mud slab, so-called because it keeps the workers out of the mud while they're putting this reinforcing mat down, which is, this is the lowest mat. This is underneath the work pits. The streetcar maintenance facility has pits in it, just like the old-fashioned gas stations, so you can get down under the car, and then there's mezzanine levels that allow them to work on the top of the car. And we also have jacks that'll be able to jack the streetcar up in the air, of course, too. But the pits greatly facilitate the work, and I sure wish I had one of those at home. Here's, they're pouring the concrete on that, placing the concrete on that reinforcing mat, and here's just representative of the women on the job. The messer woman on the left is their project manager for the building, for the maintenance and operating facility. Then we've got the Sarah, the city engineer, and then two laborers who, one from Pruce and one from Messer. There are more. This is just a representative sample. Lots of utility work, of course, going on. In fact, we had nighttime work going on last night that aggravated a lot of people. And we're going to probably have to shift some of that to daytime, which will mean that Walnut Street will have to be closed during the day. So stay tuned for news releases on that. Sorta Metro will have to ship buses off Walnut. Just a couple people down there in the trench. We also have periodic visits from FTA quarterly, and they put us through the ringer, go through everything that's in process, day-long meeting. We do a field tour as well. And so far, our audits have been clean, which is a real relief. As far as public involvement, the guy in the upper left, Mike King, is contractor employee, MPD, which stands for Messer, Pruce, Delta Rail Joint Venture. He goes around with Sarah, visits all the city, one of the field engineers, visits all the residences and the businesses as we work our way around the loop to bring them up to speed. One of our business open signs, our website, CincinnatiStreetcar.com, has lots of information, including you can pull down the monthly reports, and we also you can sign up for weekly news blasts. That's the picture in the lower right-hand corner, which has nice pictures and also lets you know where all the work's going on, so you can plan your journeys to either see it if you want to go see the work, which is, I think, pretty interesting, or avoid it if you don't. We're doing business outreach sessions. We did one in November. We're going to do another one. Unfortunately, we picked one of the blizzard, the polar vortex days, beginning of March, so we're rescheduling it for the 24th, 9:15 in the morning and 6 p.m. We have resource people there so that people on the route or people who want to start up businesses on the route can learn how they can get loans, how they can get business plans put together, essentially with free resources, and it's just a great program. And the reason for that, I don't know if you can see this very well, there's kind of a blow up in the upper left-hand corner. That is a map of vacant buildings in Over the Rhine. Every one of those little red diamonds is a vacant building. We want those occupied by either businesses or residences. This is just a CAGIS map. They pulled down from the auditor's good information and also from the city building department. So, you know, that's definitely one of the reasons we're doing the business outreach. Workforce, As far as workforce for the project, MPD only has one contract, so they're reporting for the project. We're actually doing a little better than the goal for minority hours. As you can see, not quite so good for female. We're working on that. And female minority is also running slightly low. We use super jobs to hire new employees. So for any of you who are involved in employment programs, make sure people sign up at super jobs. DBE reporting, we're running a little below the 18% goal, but we think we can get that back up. Vehicles, a lot of words there. I think I've handled most of that. Here, LTK is our consultant that actually helps us through all the design reviews. As I said, Chris is in Philadelphia today, where one of the LTK is one of their offices, and people are there from Spain reviewing the power. Here's a picture from the factory in Spain. This is the jig with some of the aluminum structure pieces on it that will go into the roof. And again, this is unreadable, flunks all readability tests, but just want to let you know we are tracking budget versus expenses by the FTA method, which means not just by contracts, but by individual components. And so far, so good on that. The CMAQ, which is, thank you very much, OKI, that money, we're about half drawn down on that one, and drawn down on the other grants as well. Contingency, we do have a contingency established. Some of that we know where it's going to go because we haven't bought, for example, the fair equipment yet, and a number of things like that. But so far, our contingency is holding up. We'll definitely take somewhat of a hit, probably somewhere between $500,000 to $1 million on the pause costs, but that'll be less than we thought it might have been. Paul Grether from Metro, that's his picture on the right, couldn't be here this morning. They have their planning committee meeting, but I'll go through their two slides here. They have a consultant, Transportation Resource Associates. They lead them through one of the many plans that FTA has us get, which is the operations plan, and that's coming along quite well, and also planning how the system will be activated. It's not like a bus where you just turn the bus on and have somebody who's been trained to drive a bus, hit the road. It's much more complicated because of the overhead power system and so forth. So there's a safety and security plan. The schedule for their contract operational people to be on site is tied to the first vehicle delivery. Atlanta and Washington, D.C., actually, my former employee, has taught everybody a lesson that, yes, streetcars can show up before you have any way to operate them or test them, and we don't want that to happen here. So that we appear to be getting all our schedules to converge still at this point. And we're coordinating with Tank, both on their bus stops as well as how this streetcar relates to their circulator system, and going along all right. Next steps, my last slide here. The goal on phase 2 right now is we really want to be able to answer all the questions people are asking us on how much is it really going to cost to go up the hill, because they know that our first construction estimate was definitely blown when the current project was bid, and we had I wasn't involved in the project at that point, but they went through 3 or 4 months of torture before they finally got the contract awarded, when City Council put more money in it, and the feds came up with some additional money. So we know the construction estimate isn't any good, and we want to make sure we get that in place and also make sure there are no fatal flaws in the design. Potentially, we may be in a position to apply for Tiger Grant announcements that just came out, but I think the city probably would like, they may have another project, so there'll be some back and forth. Plus, when you apply for the Tiger grants, you have to show you have the grant match and the operating funds, so that may very well not be the case. So, questions? Went through that pretty quickly. Be sure to give me your card if you want an electronic copy of this. All right, thank you very much. Oh, no. Good question. Our current streetcar plan has turnouts on Finley and Elder Street so that we can get to Vine Street. The 30% plans that were prepared before Governor Kasich pulled the $50 million state funds that were in the project go up Vine Street to Corey and then turn right on Corey as the terminus of that line. The big fear at that point was utility relocation. I think we've got some methods to work through that now that should keep the cost reasonable. But at this point, we're going to do a kind of a fatal flaw analysis on that alignment that was determined in the earlier work, which is just straight up Vine Street.
Follow-up?
Yes, sir.
Many of us in this room and in the room on Thursday would be very interested in, are you giving any thought to taking this across the river?
Absolutely. In fact, before I left Cincinnati in 2002 to go to Washington, before I came back, we had a number of meetings with South Bank on that very issue and also talked to Tank about it. Everybody's still very interested as far as I know, and be glad to extend that discussion. And maybe that's a better direction for phase 2.
OKI has written this in their central route.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, we definitely need an update to the rail plan, and we'll be talking to OKI about that. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
John. Appreciate your information.